When I started this podcast, I was absolutely terrified, like petrified. I remember putting up my first episode and I think it was an interview. And I was trying to interview people that I really admired because at that moment or that time in history, that's what I thought you did. And I didn't think I was good enough when I was reaching out to these people and pitching myself to them. And then when they said yes, I was like, oh my God, holy shit. So then if you go back to episode 1 and listen, I don't even remember what episode 1 is, and I don't want to go back. That's a vomit in your mouth moment. You can hear me trembling. You can hear how nervous I was. And I want to keep episode 1 there because I want you to know how far you can come if you just try. And it's now 2022 and we have hit 1,000 episodes. And I say we because one, I didn't get here alone. I am the main stage. I am the main face that you see in this brand. But what you don't see is the community behind me and the team behind me that has pushed me to actually celebrate this milestone. Because it would be very easy for me to keep going and to not pay attention to a number because it's actually not about the number for me. So I asked you all to head on over to heatherchauvin.com/1000 and submit an audio submission or a written or a video of how the podcast has impacted you. And we heard from women from all walks of life all over the globe. And some have worked with me, some have not worked with me. And I just wanted to say thank you. Something else that you may or may not know, but when I started this podcast, it wasn't to grow my business. I started this podcast because I felt alone and I felt like I was the only one in the world searching for answers. And I kept wondering why I felt like I was failing as a mother and failing as a woman. Because at that point, I was an optimist and I truly believed that when I went to my doctors or when I went to my therapists or when I read a parenting book or when I walked into a yoga class, that everybody had my best interest in mind. And what I realized is we live in a culture that is addicted to not feeling. We live in a culture that likes to hide behind our armor, and we live in a culture that likes to glorify our suffering. And the woman I am today would say to that episode 1 version of me is, thank you for not giving up. Because as many times as I have spoken my truth and hit record and hit submit, and many, many times I did not want to. And I'm sure if you've been around for a while, you can hear it in my journey. I'm a human being. And I am just like you, but with a different story. But I am human. I have emotions. I have rough days. And yet I am committed to freedom. I am committed to having the emotionally uncomfortable conversations to undo and heal and grow and learn so that we can master our guilt and master our fear and master our fear and master our overwhelm and truly become the woman, the wife, the mother, the soul having a human experience that we were born to be. So let's dive into today's episode. The first few that you're going to listen to are about parenting and guilt and how these women found me. And every story, every submission means the world to me. It creates connection. It's fascinating to know that the impact we can make by speaking our truth. And so I encourage each and every one of you listening to this, if you say, oh my gosh, I wish I could do something like this. You can, you just have to have the courage to try. So let's dive in.
Hello. I first found Heather's podcast one day while I was out for a run, and I was struggling with a lot of big emotions at that time. One of the big emotions I was struggling with was guilt, especially mom guilt. So I typed into Google how to get over guilt, and Mom is in Control podcasts came up. From then, I just was binge listening to Heather's podcast, and I continued on by joining her Mastery and Mastery Business program. And I have been forever changed. I started my journey about 2 years ago, actually inside her program. And it started from listening to all of her amazing podcasts that she had put out. So thank you so much, Heather, and big congratulations on 1,000 podcast episodes. Because of that, I was able to start my journey and change my life. So thank you for being you.
Hey, Heather, I just did my 10-minute habit. It is changing my life. Thank you so much. Anyway, I wanted to tell you the story of how I found you. So several years ago, I was searching the interwebs for resources to find out what was quote unquote wrong with my kid. Lots of behaviors at school. I was positive it was ADHD, terrified that it was other diagnoses. And I was on my way to work on a rainy day, and I was listening to yet another podcast on ADHD. And the woman I was listening to started interviewing you. And you started talking about the parents and how we could have more control over our big emotions, and how if we showed up differently, that might just impact our kids in the most amazing ways. So I quickly stopped that podcast and switched over to yours, and I became a regular listener. Fast forward to the episode called Guilt is a Liar. That literally stopped me in my tracks. I remember the episode so well. You were on a walk recording the episode, and it was the summer. You could hear the summer noises, the bugs, and the cars passing by. And it was the first time I'd ever stopped to think that I didn't need to live with the heart-wrenching, strangling guilt. And that was what opened the doors for me to call you and then to join Mastery. And I'm forever grateful for that podcast. I listened to it today, and I love you so much. Happy 1,000th episode. Take care.
Hey, Heather. Congratulations on 1,000 episodes. I'm so happy to have been part of your journey. I started listening to your podcast when my daughter was in 6th grade. She's currently in 11th grade. And I started listening because I was looking for any type of parenting advice on how to raise an adolescent daughter. And the books that I was reading, one in particular, was pissing me off because it was telling me first 3 chapters or so were like just talking about taking care of me and all the things that I should be doing, not like all the things she should be doing or what I should be doing with her. And so I tuned into your podcast because I was like, control, that's what I need. Mom is in control. And then it kind of like the switch went on. I was like, oh, I do have to take care of myself. So I don't know what it was. It was your candor, your advice, your mannerism, and man, did it sink in. Your story, for sure, of like how you came to be doing what you're doing, and all of it really resonated with me. So then I started practicing all of the things that I was learning on your podcasts, sharing what I was learning with my husband, and game changer all over the place with my kids. In fact, my kids will sometimes tell me, like, you have to go listen to Heather because you're not with it, Mom. And then I became very brave after the pandemic, and I founded a nonprofit. So I became an entrepreneur and a nonprofit leader because I was able to find space for myself and find space to let my light glow in the world that I would have never had the opportunity to do if I had just stayed small and continued the battles with my kids. So thank you, Heather. I love you so much. You've changed my life.
Hey, this is Christy. So how did I find the podcast and what impact did it have on my life? So actually listening to today's episode brought it all full circle for me. The conversation about acts of resistance reminded me so much of how far I've come, but also where I was back when I first found the podcast through social media. I've already told you I become a mom for the first time, and it was the year 2020. So this was a year when the world was full of unknowns, and obviously motherhood was no different. My biggest fear actually was not being able to believe in what I did during that time. My stress and anxiety was the worst it had ever been, and I needed something to help me escape from the daily chaos that was not serving my mental health. So I chose to take action, to take my health into my own hands, and only focus on positive messages to help get me where I knew I could get to. So this podcast not only gave me the strength I needed back then to focus on me, it continues to inspire me today to go deeper and not just listen to that voice inside of me, but to let that voice speak. Because what I believe and who I am, that matters too. And I know that now.
When I first discovered the podcast, it was Mom is in Control. And I found that because I definitely did not feel in control. I had a young son at home and we were constantly fighting. He was going to school almost every day in tears. I was going to take him to school almost every day in tears. There was so much stress and fighting in our home, and I just really was so frustrated because I thought I was going to be a better parent. And I really felt like I was failing him and our family. Listening to Heather's podcast, I realized I was not alone and that there were solutions that could be applied to change that. And it wasn't so much about fixing my son. It was about getting in touch with who I was. It was reshaping my beliefs around what we should be doing and just how to regulate my own emotions, how to prioritize myself and my family. And once all those pieces started to come together, it's been such a huge game changer. I've done the work. I participate in Heather's community, and business is great. My family gets along most of the time, but we're still human. It happens. But when those challenges happen, now I know I have solutions. We are resourced. And my family's been watching. And now they've following in. And together, we regulate our emotions. Together, we prioritize. Together, we live the life that we always wanted to live.
All right, we're back. And I just wanted to say thank you for the women who, again, brave and courageous. It actually means a lot to me because, you know, podcasting is so incredibly intimate. I don't know for any of you, but oftentimes I will find a podcast that I really resonate with. And I often like finding relational podcasts. So people who are just pull back the curtains. One of my favorites is Armchair Experts with Dax Shepard. And I listen to it when I'm at the gym or when I'm going for a walk because I feel like there's a friend in my ear. And although many times when I'm podcasting, I might bring on a quote unquote expert, but many times I am trying to kick your ass and let you know that you are a magical human being who deserves love and you are worthy of what you desire. But we develop deep, intimate relationships with each other, although I've never met you. And it just means the world to me. Sometimes I meet people in the flesh, or I've actually been in public where people have said, your voice sounds familiar. My son used to work at a fast food restaurant, and he actually said he heard my voice in someone was playing my podcast when they went through the drive-through. And it is just fascinating to me, the impact you can make by speaking your truth. So again, I wanted to say thank you. And we're going to dive into some more conversations or like audios from these women where we talk about healing and we talk about, the realness of mothering, the realness of womanhood, the realness of life, and how we can figure out who we are while still helping our children heal and while not doing the work for others. So I'm excited. Let's dive in.
I discovered Heather's podcast. To be honest, I can't remember which title it was under. That doesn't really matter so much. But I heard her interviewed by the Parenting Junkie people and just had this aha moment of yes, I have found my person in the wilderness of bad parenting places. And I think this might work for me because of how she answered some questions. And then I started listening to the podcast, and I just love it now as my go-to thing, especially because I am in mastery, and oftentimes the calls happen to align with when I'm doing prep and drop off for my daughter's school. And so I really use the podcast as a way to anchor myself in the practices, either on my commute or also on those days when my schedule doesn't quite align in the right way with maybe other offerings on the mastery schedule. So I love that aspect of the podcast. I love, like I just mentioned, feeling seen, even though I'm the listener. And so many times I listen to an episode and then it gets me in touch with the person, either to connect or just to say thank you. And yeah, it sounds cheesy, but it's true. It's it makes me feel oh, I'm not in the wilderness by myself. I am in the wilderness, and that's okay. And there's other women out here too who are also doing their best, and there's a way to connect across that. So thank you.
I was referred to Heather's podcast, Mom is in Control, after my daughter was born in 2019. It was a friend from my fitness community that actually referred me to her podcast because I had just started learning about personal development. And at that time, I can say that I was a bit naive. I didn't really know what personal development was. I didn't know what it entailed, what it consisted of. I didn't even know what it meant, which is ultimately why I was referred to Heather's podcast. I started listening and I was immediately sucked in. My eyes were opened to a whole other world, a whole world all about personal development and, self-care and putting yourself first above all else. And it was so intriguing and so fascinating to me. I knew that I had to work with Heather. It wasn't too long after that I actually reached out to Heather directly. And I ended up finding myself in her community. Little did I know that I would later be featured on her podcast, Emotionally Uncomfortable. And here we are, the tail end of 2022, entering 2023. I'm very much an active part of Heather's community. She has changed my world completely for the better. And I think I'm a lifer. I'm a lifer for Heather. I'm a lifer for her community, and her podcast is just simply amazing.
I wish I could remember where I found Heather. I think I heard her on someone else's podcast, which led me to find her podcast. And then I binge listened to so many episodes. And eventually I did a challenge with her where I learned about ETM. And that was the first time I had ever heard somebody talk about, intentionally creating how I want to feel. And there just was something, in listening to all the episodes and hearing Heather over and over again, there was something in me that was that she was drawing at that said, you don't have to settle for life as it is. There's greater, more, for you here. And I knew that I had to work with her after, just hearing all the podcast episodes. It was at a time in my life where I was launching a business, and not feeling very confident, not knowing the right steps to take as a person. I knew the steps to take maybe as in business, the practical steps. But I needed the personal development support that I saw in Heather. So I'm so glad. And then eventually, obviously, I worked with her. So I'm so glad that you do your podcast, Heather. It's such a service to all the women out there and men that might be listening to it. And thank you for the work you do.
I've been listening to Heather for about 5 years. I found her when I was looking for some parenting podcasts. And what I really loved about Heather's podcast is that it wasn't just strategies on how to manage kids, but it was the deeper stuff, the what is behind the issue. So I've really enjoyed listening to her and learning a lot through that. And then when she transformed it to the Emotionally Uncomfortable podcast, that actually spoke to me even more. I own a business, and so she really talked about some of the things that I can see, oh my gosh, these certain things affect my business. And that led to me joining her Business Mastery, which I am so grateful for. I get all the value out of it. It's amazing, and it helps in my personal life, not just my business life. So I'm so excited for Heather. I can't believe it's been 1,000 podcasts. Oh my goodness. She says it's a lot of talking, but really it's so much giving of herself to us, and I just cherish it, and I'm so grateful for it.
I stumbled across Heather's podcast in 2019 and always could guarantee that whenever I listened to a new one, I could take away a small piece of information that was really relevant to my life and easy to implement that could make a major difference. It has changed my life dramatically, just the way I look at my entire life and the people in it. And I feel like I have grown so much as a person within myself since listening to Heather, and I just love it.
First introduced to Heather's podcast by a client turned friend. I had been doing some work with her and her child, and the podcast that she shared with me really resonated with a lot of the themes that we had been talking about. And as I continued to listen, it really was just so refreshing and empowering to hear Heather speak about the things that are really difficult to talk about and the really difficult emotions that come up around some of those topics, because they're the things that we kind of feel in the background, but don't necessarily have the words to put to it. And then just being able to also hear about some of the frameworks that really help to push us past what feels like a safe zone and into something where we're really going to make a bigger difference and impact in the lives that we want to live. So I'm really thankful for finding this podcast and finding this community. And I look forward to continuing to hear about all the other things that come out through this community.
Congratulations, Heather. That is so huge. So I found you. You were interviewed on So Money with Farnoosh. And then I learned you had your own podcast. And I started listening, and I was binge listening for weeks and months. And then I decided to join Mastery and Mastery Business. And you are just an angel. The work you're doing, the way you empower women and help guide them back to themselves is just beautiful magic. And yes, I want to celebrate this with you. This is wonderful.
I found Heather's podcast scrolling on Facebook one night, and she popped up, and I saw she had a podcast. I had just gotten a job where I was commuting, so I thought I'd download her podcast, and then I forgot about it until 3 weeks later. I got in my car and I turned on my car, and her podcast just started playing over the Bluetooth. And what she was saying was exactly what I needed to hear that morning. So I started listening to her podcast, and I eventually started working with Heather. I knew I wanted change in my life. I knew I wanted to feel different in my life. And what an impact. My life has completely changed after working with Heather, and I feel completely different. And it has been the best change in my life. And now I am living the life that I want to live.
I remember exactly how I found the Mom is in Control podcast. It was about 5 years ago, and I was searching in my podcast library about conscious parenting. And I found an interview that Heather did with Wellness Mama, and I heard her story. I heard about how she survived cancer. She's a mom of 3. I heard about her journey as a woman, as a businesswoman, as a mother, and an entrepreneur, and it so resonated with me. I subscribed to the Mom is in Control podcast, and for about 3 weeks, I binged on all of the episodes, the content, the tools, and each and every episode felt like she was speaking directly to me. So then in 3 weeks, I reached out and I enrolled in Mastery, and I have not looked back. That was almost 5 years ago. And so now here I am on the other side, still listening, still learning, still getting emotionally uncomfortable. And I'm inside of Heather's community as a mentor. And I could not be more proud of 1,000 fucking episodes. Way to go, Heather. I'm so proud of you and this community. It's changed my life. You're changing other people's lives. Congratulations on this milestone.
Hey, so how did I find the podcast? Actually, I was searching for a completely different podcast, and I don't even remember now which one I was looking for, what search terms I put in, nothing. But up popped Emotionally Uncomfortable, and I was like, well, that's what I need. And it was exactly what I need. And ever since I've started listening and I've become part of Heather's community, I have been incredibly emotionally uncomfortable. In the best way possible, though. What I appreciate about Heather and the podcast is that it's very real. And saying that something is real, that's almost become a cliche and it's overused. But Heather's not pretending to be anybody that she's not, and the things that she talks about on the podcast and the people that she brings on, it's not, it's not photoshopped, it's not stylized, it's not image crafting. And it's just been very helpful and healing, and in the best way possible, challenging to hear, people talk about the things that we all go through, and, ways to, be present with those uncomfortable emotions so you can push through and live the life you were meant to live. So thank you, Heather. Love the podcast. That's it. Bye.
Well, thank you. There we have it. 1,000 fucking episodes. That's all I got to say. A few years ago, I was actually talking to somebody today, and they said, holy shit, 1,000 episodes. And I said, yeah, that's a lot of talking. A few years ago, I prompted myself, I challenged myself to do a podcast a day. And it was like a 20-minute podcast. And I remember, I'll never forget this. One woman said to me, I was listening to you when you did your podcast a day for a year. And about halfway through the year, I stopped listening because you kept saying the same thing over and over and over again. And I laughed. And I have the best community, by the way. I don't get a lot of hate. And when I do, I have the most respectful conversations with haters. It is my jam. I'm like, tell me more. Because I get offended, but people don't know I'm offended. And I don't get defensive. That's what I'm trying to say. So I lean into their, emotional discomfort, and we have the most beautiful, respectful conversations in my DM. So I love it. When people give me feedback in a respectful way. Of course, we all want to be respected. But what I wanted to say is that year, I challenged myself because I could feel something that wanted to be birthed inside of me, like that message. And I was like, there's something coming and I don't know what it is. And I just had to have the courage to be vulnerable. And so repetition, Repetition is where the magic happens. And the more you repeat, the more you listen, the more you do, the more you implement your habits, and the more you consistently show up to become your best self, to understand your children, to overcome your obstacles, that is where the magic happens. So I just wanted to say thank you. I will continue to show up for you. And I just hope you continue to show up for you. We have so much more coming in 2023, and I'm just so fucking grateful for you. You have no idea. I just started talking to myself, hoping that one person would listen. And I just wanted to say thank you. So as much as you are grateful for this show, I am grateful that you listen.
So I found Heather in 2020 for her podcast, Mom is in Control, and it has literally changed my life. Every podcast has helped me dive deeper into the healing of myself and my soul. Sometimes it is like Heather is literally in my head answering the questions that come up for me as I need them answered. When I joined Mastery this year in April of 2022, the growth and the healing and the rediscovery of myself exploded. I would not be where I am today without Heather. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.